This week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents with us. Christopher Dickey of Newsweek and The Daily Beast. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Always a pleasure.
Okay, also with us, Claude Guibal of Radio France.
Hello.
In the studio and not out in the field, which is good news because you're always on the go. Michael Kirtley, filmmaker and reporter, who is just back from Estonia, you said.
That's right. It's a very secretive trip, but we're working behind the curtain.
And Paul Taylor of the Reuters news agency, who I hope hasn't been chained too much to the desk this week.
I've been chained to layoffs at Peugeot this week.
All right, well, maybe we'll talk about that in part two when we talk about the situation here in Europe. The World This Week, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our account here, at François F24. It was initially reported as Syria's worst massacre since the start of the uprising 16 months ago, but with Damascus keeping out foreign reporters information on what exactly happened in the Hama province town of Tremse is secondhand. The United Nations backs the opposition's claim that it was government forces that rained shells on that poor farming village before pro-regime militiamen moved in. But those activists differ on the death toll, which ranges from 30 to 220. Paul Taylor, you'd think that at some point it would get easier to report on what's going on inside of Syria. But it's proving incredibly murky. And just the other day in our newsroom, we had a mix-up because we're getting this amateur video footage of what's going on, and we broadcast the wrong footage, and that happens, it seems, to everyone.
It's terribly difficult to know, to be certain of the authenticity of the material that we're getting, however hard you try, and it's so incredibly dangerous for journalists to go in there, to stay in there, to operate there, that you're very, very dependent on secondhand information and on networks and on people that you hope are honest brokers, like the UN observers. But it's a situation where it's very difficult, and therefore where information can be potentially manipulated. We had there was a story in a big newspaper this morning saying that Syria has been moving its chemical weapons around. That raises all sorts of questions. If confirmed, what are they doing it for? Is it to put it in a safer place? Is it potentially to think about using them in some form against the opposition? Who knows?
In Tremse, it is clear, though, that there was a massacre, according to
Well, it's clear that a lot of people were killed. But look at Tremse. Look at the video, some of which you were just showing, that came out of Tremse. If you look at the unadulterated video, the longest clips that you can find, what you see is a long line of men who are dead. They're all young men. They've all been killed, as far as you can tell, in different ways, so they weren't all lined up and shot against a wall. So were they fighters, or were they innocents who were just standing around? And if they were fighters, and the Syrian military was using whatever resources it has to fight against them, then what is that? Is that a massacre, or is that combat? And if we don't know how many were killed, whether it was 30 or 220, whose word are we relying on to find out? We don't know. We just don't know. I think that I'm just reinforcing the point that you're making about how much we don't know about these situations. But I can tell you, having covered a fair number of wars, that it is sort of a usual tactic for one side or another to line up dead bodies and call it a massacre, either by taking reporters there or sending out video of it. And it's, in my mind, if people are killed in combat, they may be martyred in the view of their side, but it's not a massacre.
All right, so we're going to continue. What is clear, though, Christopher, is the fact that we are seeing the number of refugees, which continues to pour into neighboring countries.
Terrible, yes.
And we know that the level of violence is continuing to spike.
Well, that's right. But then again, you've got a lot of innocent people who are being hurt, who are being driven out of their homes. There's what amounts to ethnic cleansing going on in parts of Syria. You have people being forced across the borders by the tens of thousands. Soon it'll be hundreds of thousands. In some cases, those people are retreating to what are areas that will be used for staging for the guerrillas. Already that's happening in Turkey. So what you have, in fact, is a widening war. It's a desperate situation. One wishes you could resolve something about it, but nothing we see happening suggests that's going to happen.
And at this time last week, we were discussing the fact that the French foreign minister had just told a Friends of Syria conference here in Paris that we'd soon be hearing from Manaf Tlas, a general from inside Assad's inner circle who had defected. Claude Guibal, 1 week on, we still haven't seen him.
Well, last week, Laurent Fabius said Manaf Tlas was on his way to Paris. Yesterday, I've seen Laurent Fabius, and we asked him, where is Manaf Tlas? And nobody knows where he is. He hasn't spoken yet. We know his father, Mustafa Tlas, is in Paris, and his father is an interesting figure of the family because Mustafa Tlas used to be Hafez al-Assad companion. He was
long-time defense minister.
All-time defense minister of Hafez al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad. Is from a Sunni family of Rastan in the middle of Syria. And is well respected by the army, and his son, Top General Manaf Tlas, at the beginning of the repression, has taken its distances with the regime because he tried to negotiate with the radical members of the rebellion in Rastan, and then he was put aside. So Manaf Tlas seems to be really taking distance from the regime, but still is well respected by the people who are still faithful to Bashar because of his father, because his father has a legitimacy in the army.
Well, yes, but you've had a number of people defecting even before the revolution. You had people, former intelligence chiefs coming here, and the Tlas family particularly is very well connected here.
Yeah, they do have a lot of.
They have a lot of connections. I mean, his sister is one of the most prominent hostesses in Parisian society. She used to have an intimate relationship with Roland Dumas,
the former French foreign minister.
The former French foreign minister. She was very close to Olivier Gisbert, the publisher. I mean, they're very well-connected families. So I don't think he's sleeping under a bridge while he's here.
It's not.
Tlas hasn't yet spoken to reporters, but Wednesday Syria saw its first major diplomatic defection. The ambassador to Iraq, Nawaf al-Faris, he's been granting interviews. Michael, we talk about Syria every week, and we're saying, all right, this is the tipping point. That's the tipping point. Could this be a tipping point?
Well, compared to Libya, we were thinking about the same thing at a certain particular point, but there was a motivation on the outside world to do something about Libya that seems to be different in Syria. I think as long as we see a standoff between the different powers about how to approach Syria, there's not going to be a tipping point. And I think that inside Syria today, as Christopher was alluding to, and Paul, there seems to be it's very difficult to find out exactly what's happening in the country. So exactly what is going to be that tipping point inside country, it's going to be difficult to predict from the outside.
Impossible.
We're going to move on and look at Egypt. First trip abroad from the new president. Where does he go? Saudi Arabia. Relations between Riyadh and Cairo often strained under Hosni Mubarak, but neither did the Muslim Brotherhood get on well with the more hardline Wahhabites inside the Saudi kingdom. That's the past, though, says the Brotherhood's Mohammed Morsi.
This is, in truth, my first visit outside of Egypt, and I was eager that it be here in Saudi Arabia. This visit unites our hearts. What has taken place between us in talks and dialogue is in the interest of this region and its stability, as well as in the interest of the Egyptian and Saudi people.
Claude Guibal, why did he go to Saudi Arabia?
Why? Because it's interesting, that he chose Saudi Arabia for his first visit. Actually, the first speech President Morsi made on the day of his elections was to say, by the way, that he's going to strengthen the relationship of Egypt and Iran. And it was a shock for everybody. In the meantime, Saudi Arabia promised him $1 billion through the Islamic Bank of Development, which is based in Riyadh. It's a strategic and pragmatic move, Historically speaking, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Muslim Brothers are not very good, but Mohammed Morsi said he was keen on not interfering in internal affairs, and that's what Saudi Arabia wanted to hear. And it's also a way for Saudi Arabia to control, the Muslim Brothers, because they have close relationship with Qatar, in the last years. the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt has found a kind of platform with Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera is hosting a show with one of the most prominent figures in the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Sheikh Youssef al-Qaradawi. So it's a way for Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to control the Muslim Brothers and to control Egypt from Qatar.
Control?
Well, to have a look on, at least to manage to control them, not to leave them go to Qatar and just,
What signal does it send, Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think basically Morsi needs all the friends he can get at this point. And he doesn't want the Saudis to be his enemies. He wants to be seen to be reaching out to them. But, I think from the Western point of view, from the American point of view particularly, they look at these guys and they say, well, they're all these Islamists, they're all sort of Wahhabis and Muslim brothers and must all be the same. And they're not the same at all. First thing to know about the Muslim Brotherhood is they are not monarchists. Their roots are as a revolutionary organization and a popular organization. It's not about being ruled by one family that names the country after itself. So they are seen by the Saudi regime and by the Saudi monarchy as a threat, and they will continue to be seen that way. But as Claude points out, even if you see somebody as a threat, it doesn't mean you don't want to talk to them. In fact, you hold them closer in some cases, and I think that's what's going on.
Hug them close. I think what Chris was saying about him needing lots of friends. Morsi is obviously in a very difficult power struggle at the moment inside Egypt with the army, and he's, he needs international legitimacy. He needs to build himself up by these kinds of visits and by being able to show that he really is the face of Egypt. Whether he's also trying to reach a relationship, I think, with the army where he gets a decent share of the power, but it doesn't lead to conflict in the streets. So he's pushing forward as he can to try and achieve some compromise over a parliamentary election by having the parliament meet again, even though it's been outlawed, and by trying to sort of build up this legitimacy, build up his position, and probably also, although I know less about that, within the Muslim Brotherhood, because he probably wasn't their first choice candidate, and he's probably not their most powerful leader.
No, I think Paul's put his finger on something. I mean, if your position is as tenuous as Morsi's, even your title of president is as tenuous as his, then it's not a bad idea to go and be received by a king, even if you're not a monarch. I mean, that red carpet, the symbolism of the red carpet, very important for Morsi right now.
It gives him the legitimacy he doesn't have in Egypt, because he hasn't sworn in front of the parliament. The parliament has been dissolved. So Morsi is looking for legitimacy everywhere, and is looking for money, because the economy is the biggest struggle he will have, the biggest fight he will have to lead.
And there's so many Egyptians who work in the Gulf and send home money.
More than 1 million people, and Egypt...
I think you also have to look at the power dynamics in the Middle East. I'll never forget, right after 9/11, there was a high-level diplomat at the Egyptian embassy that told me there are only two countries that count in the Arab world, and that's Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Egypt because of people and the military, and Saudi Arabia because of wealth and being the sort of the crucible of Islam. And I think that what you see also, going to Saudi Arabia is not simply an effort on Morsi's part to establish credibility, nor simply a part on the Saudis to be reassured. But I think that we're also looking at a kind of a potential mating that's going to be taking place over the years, because Morsi needs Saudi Arabia because of the people there. And Saudi Arabia needs the people of Saudi Arabia and the military backing to protect it, against Iran.
And Michael Kirtley, just a question on this. This week, the White House said that Barack Obama will be meeting with Morsi. It'll be on the sidelines of the UN's annual assemblies in the fall, in September. So that meeting taking place in New York. Should that meeting be taking place rather at the Oval Office?
The context in New York is, I don't know exactly the context in New York, but I think the invitation of Morsi to the Oval Office would have to be in the context of an official invitation. And I don't know if that's particularly the situation right now.
Not 6 weeks before the American elections. I don't think that's going to happen.
But Hillary Clinton is traveling to Egypt next week.
This weekend, yeah. But she's not the president.
She's not the president, indeed. One final question on this, Claude Guibal. It's been a week of confusion over this issue. Parliament dissolved. Then they met anyway, just for 5 minutes symbolically. Then the High Court said no, don't do that again. And then Morsi says, all right, we won't, effectively.
Well, it's a legal fight. It's really interesting that everything that is taking place in Egypt now is legal fight. And behind that, the fight is for the constitution, to know who's going to write the constitution that will guarantee the army to keep its prerogative in, tomorrow's Egypt.
Are we to understand that, because we've been talking so much about the military and the fact that it hasn't gone away and it's still there and it's still making a lot of decisions, the fact that Egypt, for all of the chaos that we've reported on, does have institutions that matter?
Well, Egypt thinks it has institutions that matters because everybody talks about constitution, everybody talks about parliament, everybody talks about constitutional court, and the constitutional court says one thing and another, puts rules for the elections that are not valid 6 months after. So who knows?
Well, but your point is, I think, right on. What we're seeing in Egypt is politics. We're seeing a whole framework of politics that's built around institutions. There is force, there's people turning out in the streets, there's the threat of military force, there's all of that, but ultimately it's more like a political system that we know, an open political system, than it is like the dictatorship that existed before, or the dictatorships that exist in most of the rest of the Arab world.
I think you just have to put a bit of a question mark over the degree of independence, maybe, of the judiciary from the old regime and therefore from the army.
We do that in the United States, too. We wonder about the degree of independence of the judiciary.
When we come back in the World This Week, we're going to be looking at the situation in eastern Congo and the sometimes frosty relationship, it seems, when it came to hosting France's new president over in the UK. This is the World This Week.